host, Marc Patrone. Well, the more frosty things get between Canada and the United States in terms of our trade relationship with that country, the warmer our relations seem to be getting with the Chinese. Is it only a matter of time before Canada's tariffs on Chinese EVs are lifted? Prime Minister Carney won't say yet, but Canada's foreign minister is in China for talks. After Carney's meeting with Premier Doug Ford yesterday, Ford posted this on X, omitting any further demands for elbows up style retaliatory tariffs against the Americans. Ford writes, "Thank you, Prime Minister Mark Carney, for coming by and for working with Ontario to get things built fast. From the Ring of Fire to large-scale nuclear facilities, there are huge opportunities to power Canada's economic growth." Well, just earlier this week, Ford demanded tougher action by Carney against Trump.
My number one job is make sure we protect the people of Ontario. I need to protect the communities against that tyrant south of the border, which drives me absolutely nuts. That guy, President Trump, he's a real piece of work. You know something? What my message to the Prime Minister when I meet him on Thursday is, if you can't get a deal, let's start hitting him back. Let's start hitting the U.S. back hard.
So much for that message. China's ambassador to Canada, meantime, says that the country would consider dropping its Canadian canola products tariffs in exchange for Canada dropping its levies on electric vehicles. As I mentioned, Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand is in Beijing ahead of a planned meeting between Prime Minister Carney and Xi Jinping. And again, it's only the second time that a Canadian foreign minister has visited China in 8 years. Wyatt Claypool will be joining us to talk about Canada appearing to cozy up to China in light of China's ongoing interference in Canada, including our elections. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre stirred up a hornet's nest when he accused the RCMP of covering up Trudeau-era criminal behavior, crimes including alleged obstruction of justice in the SNC Lavalin prosecution case. He also accused the RCMP of covering it all up. Here is RCMP Commissioner Michael Duham saying he doesn't know anything about any RCMP cover-up.
Commissioner, in a recent interview, the leader of the opposition called the leadership of the RCMP despicable when it comes to enforcing laws against the Liberal government, and accused your officers of covering up for former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in the SNC Lavalin affair. What's your response to Pierre Poilievre's comments, and have you ever faced political pressure from the government to not pursue charges?
So I think we've talked about SNC Lavalin quite a lot under the previous government, and I think it was clear that there's no interference. I don't take any orders from any political individual. And as far as his comment with regards to senior management, I would invite Mr. Poilievre to meet with us and to meet with the people who run this great organization, 32,000 strong.
Well, 2 years ago, that same individual, Michael Duham, was all ready to testify in committee about why or how Trudeau has been blocking the release of certain cabinet documents to the RCMP, documents that might have implicated the former Prime Minister, but the Liberals used their superior numbers in committee to stop that testimony before it could take place. Is there any actual proof of a crime being committed by the Trudeau-era government as far as SNC Lavalin goes? Well, Democracy Watch, as well as the Conservative Party, say a recorded message, phone call really, between then Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould and the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick at the time, is a smoking gun that the RCMP ignored.
Quite determined, quite firm, that he wants to know why the DPA route, which Parliament provided for, isn't being used. And I think he's going to find a way to get it done one way or another. So he's in that kind of mood, and I wanted to be aware of that.
Okay.
So I don't know if he's going to call you directly. He might. And he's willing, I think he's thinking about getting somebody else to give him some advice. He doesn't want to do anything that's outside the box of what's legal or proper. But his understanding is, the DPA tool is there, and you have options that we've talked about before to ask for reasoning from the DPP or even to take over the prosecution of he just wants to understand more at this point why the DPA route isn't being taken up in this route. So.
Yeah. Now, she recorded that surreptitiously, obviously for a reason. She made it public for a reason. But somehow the RCMP just didn't treat it maybe as seriously as they could have. In the United States, 2 alleged members of Antifa have been indicted by a federal grand jury this week for reportedly attacking an Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE facility in Texas. That just happened this past July. Now, with Trump designating Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization, we know that Juno News has reported the Carney government has been silent on whether it plans to follow suit. If it does not, could Antifa use Canada as a base of operations for launching attacks in the United States? And what implications does that have in terms of our relationship with the Americans? Independent journalist Wyatt Claypool joins us. Welcome to this show. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mark. We used to cross paths sometimes on Saga 960, and now we cross paths once again on Juno.
Well, I love crossing paths with you because you're so well versed on so many different topics. And so I want to hit you with these 3 anyway. I mean, let's talk a little bit about, let's start with China. We've got the foreign affairs minister over there trying to pave the way for an upcoming meeting between Xi Jinping and Mark Carney. We all have all of that going on as our relationships with the Americans seem to be at not an all-time low perhaps, but at one of the lowest ebbs that I've ever seen it. Should we read something into this? I mean, are we shifting our influence over to China and away from the United States? And did the tariffs necessitate that type of action by the Carney government?
Oh, 100%, because look at the way that Carney and Dominic LeBlanc were trying to negotiate with the Americans to try and come to a trade deal, and now how they're negotiating with the Chinese government. We seem to be far more willing to play ball with Chinese government on trying to remove certain tariffs we have on their products in order so that they'll remove them on the other side. While, yes, we've technically removed some counter tariffs against the United States, it was more so because we got caught out in looking very hypocritical in tariffing USMCA compliant goods or trying to put in place the digital services tax. But when it comes to China, we're willing to potentially get rid of the tariff and restrictions on their electric vehicles in order to remove the canola tariffs that they have on us. But when it comes to the United States, we won't even talk about potentially even just lowering the tariffs we have on US dairy and poultry and stuff like that. We act offended that they counter tariffed us, but we aren't doing anything. We're not putting anything on the table or even threatening anything to try and get to a trade deal with them. We've almost put the US on ice. We pretend like we almost want to get to a deal every once in a while. But when you go to China, then we actually see what a country looks like when they actually want to reach a deal. You're willing to put things on the table. You're willing to actually directly negotiate. Whereas with the US, we just kind of fart around a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, our canola farmers need help right now. Many of them are in dire straits. And so this might be good news for them. Any kind of deal with China on canola would be huge. However, I mean, to your point, we spent what, 50 billion, I want to say, in subsidies on these EV plants. And those tariffs were designed basically to protect those plants, the industry in Canada, such as it exists. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that, how far Canada is willing to bend over in order to accommodate the Chinese and to heal the ongoing rift with them.
Well, I guess Mark Carney is a perfect excuse to let the Chinese electric vehicles back in the country because it seems like Stellantis is going bankrupt in Canada no matter what we do. Because it turns out if you create a bad business environment, you cannot subsidize it enough to make it worth their while to stay in the country. So they're heading down to the U.S. So I guess we can remove the tariffs against Chinese electric vehicles at this point because what are we even protecting?
I mean, how do you gloss over the Chinese interference in our elections, other spying issues, interference elsewhere in our economy by the Chinese? I mean, how do we set that aside? How do we forget that any of that happened in order to move forward with some kind of cozier trade relationship with the Chinese? How do they justify that?
Well, they don't really justify it at all. I think it's more so that genuinely there is probably more of an anti-American bias inside the current liberal government than there is an anti-Chinese bias. And so we're in a position where we're just going to completely paper over and ignore all the election interference that not only occurred in the past, but is ongoing. Because we'd rather make a deal with them than make a deal with the Americans, because I guess that would be very non elbows up of us to actually try and sign a deal with the US. Oh, I always hate when people say, "Well, we're diversifying our trade. Look, we have 20% more exports outside of for non-US trade partners." Okay, well, our US exports have fallen 14%, and by the way, our exports to the US are like 80% of our exports and the others are 20%. So I would rather not have a 20% reduction in the 80% of our trade compared to a 20% increase of just the 20% of our trade. It's stupid.
I wonder if this is a ploy, really, to get the Americans' attention. I mean, is this a way to say to the Trump administration, look, if you're not prepared to make a deal with us, then, we've got these guys over here. They're ready to make a deal. Maybe we'll cozy up with the Chinese. I mean, geographically speaking, it makes much more sense to deal with the Americans. They're our neighbor, our friend, generally speaking. But could this be, I mean, the timing of it, right? The timing of this visit by Anita and Anand to China in the midst of these intense negotiations, these trade negotiations with the Americans. I mean, I don't think that's a coincidence. What do you think?
Probably not a coincidence, but I also think that I would even say it's hard to even give the liberals credit that they may be trying to get some leverage with the US, because in a certain sense, I don't think trying to act warmly towards China is going to get you on the good side of Donald Trump. And if they were seriously wanting to do hardball negotiations, it would have started months ago. I think that genuinely, like so many things this government does, they don't know what they're doing or why they're doing anything. And so I think it's just that they genuinely see China as a bigger threat, because politically they're supposed to not care about what the Americans are doing. At the same time, they obviously do care because they keep trying to go back to the table. But I think that again, I just don't even know what they're attempting to do, because with America, we could have probably gotten a trade deal that was far better than the one it looks like we're going to be getting. But again, they got wrapped up. They kind of put a noose around their neck with the elbows up stuff. And so they needed to have that public perception that they're fighting back and they're playing hardball, which equals they couldn't agree to anything, because if they agreed to any concessions, well, they would have looked weak, even though, frankly, if we got rid of supply management in Canada, Canadians would be better off by default, even more. And then you also could potentially get to a better trade deal, which would be excellent. But because that's a liberal constituency, the dairy cartel, they don't want to touch it.
Yeah, that would be disastrous for the Liberal Party in Quebec. Let's talk about this story. Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre stirring up a bit of a hornet's nest when he accused the RCMP of covering up Trudeau-era criminal behavior. So we're talking about SNC Lavalin. A lot of liberals online, as you've probably noticed, are freaking out over this. They're attacking Pierre Poilievre over what he said. He's suggesting that Trudeau probably should have ended up in prison for what he did. And pointing a finger at the RCMP is pretty huge. What do you think of what he said and what the backlash has been?
I find the backlash is stupid, for one thing. I saw a clip recently when Peter MacKay was on Power and Politics with David Cochrane, and David Cochrane is acting like this is so out of left field. Who could possibly say that maybe Trudeau or someone else should have been criminally charged? This is not Canadian for him to say. And then Dufresne also saying the sort of same things at the press conference, acting like this is an attack against the police themselves. Polyev was specifically going after the leadership of the RCMP. And we've known this for a very long time, especially when Brenda Lucky was the RCMP commissioner. It's a very political position getting that high up in the RCMP. You don't do it because you're a great cop and you're a great administrator. You do it because you are a friend of the government. And this isn't just Polyev saying these things. They act like this is coming out of left field. I just read an article this morning from APTN, the government subsidized Aboriginal news service, that came out to say, and they were also quoting someone from Democracy Watch saying that, yes, what the RCMP did was effectively a cover up. Yes, they weren't taking documents and throwing them in a shredder or burning them. But what they were doing was they were just not really pushing to get documents. They were not forcing the PMO to hand over things. They basically just requested things. And if the PMO just says, here's what we'll give you, and we're not going to give you that other stuff, they're like, okay. And then, well, of course, if you don't investigate, you're effectively helping them cover it up.
Yeah, I mean, I did mention that a couple of years back, the Conservatives tried to get the committee to force cabinet, and they tried to get that out of Duhem himself at that committee meeting. But at the time, the Liberals had a majority in terms of numbers in that committee, and they just adjourned the meeting, just ended it right there. And
And we
so,
have all I was gonna say we have all this stuff happening in 2018 and 2019, and they really needed to wait until 2023 before they wrapped up their non-investigation, or was it they were just ending it at a time when they thought people wouldn't care?
I mean, people seem shocked by that statement, but as you point out with the McKay statement earlier, there's nothing new here. And I guess you have to ask. I mean, apart from firing the bosses over there at the RCMP, if the Conservatives were to form government, would they restructure things? I mean, the fact that the RCMP essentially been politicized because the appointments come under, I guess, is it the PMO or whatever, but they're the ones who are directly responsible for who has that top job as commissioner. And I mean, there's a problem with that. I mean, in a way, this has been, coming for a long time in terms of the problems with, separating the RCMP from the politicians, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, and a great example of just how political leadership is in the RCMP, and maybe a good way of fixing it is allowing normal RCMP officers to help, internally elect people who are better, that they actually think are good cops, that they think will back them up, that actually care about good criminal justice. But a great example of just how political they are is remember the head of the RCMP for Cape Breton when they were announcing the gun buyback rollout. And he comes out and says, well,
Yes.
this is great because we're getting guns off the street and I fully support this. I'm like, really? Are you such a flat footed police officer that you don't understand that it's not the fisherman who owns a shotgun who's the problem? And it's probably, the gangbangers down in downtown Toronto who are the real problem? Like, but it's a political position. He's saying all this stuff, so maybe one day he also gets to be deputy commissioner, and then maybe he gets to be full commissioner of the RCMP.
There are problems there, even with the optics of having Mark Carney make that announcement yesterday, flanked by RCMP officers.
Because they have nothing better to do but hang around Mark Carney saying that I will maybe, potentially, maybe crack down on crime. All they're not even getting rid of Bill C-75, but they're going to do more bail reform, which isn't going to do anything because we still have the same day automatic release laws on the books.
Yeah, I mean, they broke it, and now we're supposed to trust them to fix something that they obviously are not particularly interested in doing. I've got to ask you about the fact that these two Antifa members have been prosecuted. They've been indicted south of the border. I mean, we didn't follow suit with Trump's decision to declare this organization Antifa to be a domestic terror organization. And it struck me that Antifa could very well continue to infiltrate Canada and even use Canada as a base of operations to launch attacks south of the border. Do you think that's a possibility? And what are the implications there between the United States and Canada as we go through this sensitive trade negotiation?
Oh, 100%, because in right now, Canada is the top Western country for money laundering, especially for terrorism. You have a lot of IRGC and Hezbollah and other Hamas type front groups who operate in Canada. We just listed Samadoun as a terrorist group this year, but we still have the government not even willing to arrest the leaders of Samadoun, despite the fact that they still hold rallies, burn Canadian flags, and talk about how October 7th was brilliant, and literally handing out pamphlets teaching people how to commit a mass casualty terror attack. That's happening in the streets of Vancouver. And in British Columbia, the AG, Nikki Sharma, will not move against this person, Charlotte Cates, who is still the leader of Samadoun. And it's a well known money laundering operation as well as a terror promoting organization. Even when we list them as terrorists, we don't really do anything about it.
Absolutely. And it's interesting listening to some of the late night comedians south of the border, and even Democrats. I think it's a Democrat talking point now. There is no Antifa. It doesn't exist. I mean, I think it does.
Yeah,
I'm pretty
I'm
sure.
not sure. I'm pretty sure you don't have to be registered as a charitable organization and have a public-facing HQ to be an organization. There's a lot of things out there that don't have a charitable tax status number that are in fact bad organizations. I'm not sure if the Taliban has any specific numbered company that they operate under in Canada, but I think we can still ban them, even though we don't know who they specifically are in terms of a physical in terms of like the physical environment of Canada. We can see the Antifa flags, we can see Antifa tactics, we can see people calling themselves Antifa. It is an organization, and you can ban them. It's a decentralized organization, but
Yes.
that's kind of how terrorist groups work. Again,
Yeah.
they're not going to have office space in downtown Toronto.
Exactly. Wyatt Claypool, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
And that is it for this edition of Straight Up with Marc Patrone. Appreciate you tuning in, my friends. Let's do it again real soon, shall we? We'll see you next time.